Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's SEJ webinar with our partner Conductor. This is Lauren Baker, founder of SEJ. It's a pleasure to have you all here. We're going to be talking enhancing content writing with AI, opportunities and challenges. And with us today, we have Connor Carreras from the Senior Director of Customer Success at Conductor. Hey, Connor, how are you?
Hey, Lauren, I'm doing good. How are you?
Doing great, doing great.
Awesome.
And then Connor, we're going to do some housekeeping for the attendees that are kind of trickling in right now, but you have a background in data and AI. Would you like to go over that real quick before we get started?
Yeah, sure. So I have, prior to joining Conductor, I actually worked for 10 years in the data and AI space. So I was at Informatica, Trifacta, Alteryx, Microsoft Azure. So this is one of my favorite topics to discuss because it's really the connection between what I built my career around and what I'm doing now. So hopefully you guys learned some good insights from this.
I'm excited. I'm excited. So just to let everyone know, we have different opportunities to interact with Connor and myself during the webinar itself. First off, you'll see a chat area in the SEJ webinar console. If everyone can just go ahead and, feel free to write hi, where you're from, things like that. I see the little, the emojis or emoticons or whatever are going crazy right now with smiley faces and confetti and everything else. That's great to see. Also during Connor's presentation, as you have questions, please feel free to enter them into the Q&A section. After Connor's finished, we're going to be going through some of the top voted and most relevant questions and reviewing them in an open forum Q&A. Wow, I see that this thing is really going crazy here. So thanks to everyone for interacting here. And then also during Connor's presentation, she'll be referencing different, we have some white papers, Conductor blog post all about everything you're presenting from an AI and content perspective. So she'll be referencing those resources as well, which are all available in the handout section of the webinar. And that's it from my side. Connor, I'm going to hand things over to you.
All right. Awesome. So let's jump into it. You've already gotten a brief intro to me, so I won't spend more time talking about myself. What I'm going to do instead is give you guys a brief outline for where we're going today in this presentation. So as we said, my background is in data and AI. So I think that the best way to really get a feel for how you can apply AI for your own SEO and content work is to actually understand how it works. So what is driving all of these models? And so we're going to start with the basics. How do LLMs and generative AI actually produce outputs? What's going on, under the covers? And then in the second half of the presentation, really the second 2/3, we're going to really tie this back into SEO. So what does this mean for you? And then how can you take these new AI technologies that have been all over social media, LinkedIn, the news over the past few months, and apply them to write better content, and kind of more targeted content? So we're going to get to the tips. I think that's one of the key parts of why everybody's joined this presentation. But we are going to spend a little bit of time in the tech to start out with. So bear with me, stick it out. It should be pretty entertaining. And I think the tech is really what illuminates why these are, in my opinion, some of the best tips that we've got. So the first thing, why should we even care? There have been a lot of hype cycles, especially in SEO, in marketing, in every industry. And so what's so different about the current AI trend? And I think really the main reason to care are these two statistics on the screen. So this was a survey that Forbes did recently of a number of companies. And what's really come out is that a big majority of companies either are planning to use GPT for content going forward, or they're already using AI to generate long-form written content. So this is the future. It's part of what is going to be, if it's not already, a core part of our jobs as SEOs, as content writers. And so we want to be ahead of that trend. We want to be at the forefront and really taking advantage of this. And so how do we do that? let's dig into some of the basics. So you've probably seen a lot of news articles like this since January. I've screenshotted a few. Really, we're at the point where generative AI, these technologies like ChatGPT, they kind of sound like a human. They're almost sentient seeming to a certain extent. You might recall from the New York Times, this long read from a journalist who got really deep with the Bing chatbot, and it ended up like telling him to break up with his wife and leave her. And there was another Google engineer who thought his chatbot was sentient. So what's actually going on here? Are these chatbots really artificial general intelligence, or is there something else going on behind the scenes? What makes them sound so realistic that they trick a Google engineer? And really, when we get into it, the reason they sound like us is because they've been built on a massive amount of content and text that we've created. So ChatGPT, which is the main model that I'm going to be referencing throughout this presentation, was actually trained on 570 gigabytes of internet text. Like, that is a lot of internet text that this thing ate, essentially. And after it goes through and it ingests all of that text data, the engineers, to oversimplify things, build a statistical model on top of that text data that basically says, for a particular prompt or a particular type of question, what are the most likely answers or sequences of words or phrases that should naturally be a response to that question. And that's really, in a simplified way, what produces the LLM output. When I say LLM, that means large language model. And it's one of the ways that people refer to these generative AI models like ChatGPT, GPT-3, GPT-4, Bard, whichever one we're talking about. And so you might think, okay, that sounds really general. You've got a ton of internet data, you've got a model, it spits stuff out. But how are we able to have conversations with this? How are we able to prompt it and get it to provide us with answers or recommendations or suggestions? And that's all because of a process that OpenAI, who developed the model, puts it through, called reinforcement learning with human feedback. And so this is one of the links. If you are curious about skimming through a really interesting academic paper, it's one of the links in the handouts, and you're welcome to review it. But to steal one of their screenshots, what this means is that they create a large collection of different prompts. They give those prompts to their baby model. And then after it gives out different outputs back to them, a human comes in and labels. It says, this output is good. This output isn't what we want. It sends that back into the model. And so it goes through this training process until the model gets to a point where it's really consistently producing outputs that the humans mark as being a good output. So it's really like training a dog. I think that's the simplest way to think of it. You tell the dog to sit enough times and you give him treats when he sits, and eventually the dog associates the word sit or the gesture to sit with the command that he's performing. And that's fundamentally what we are doing with these models. And so if you take that dog analogy a little bit further, the dog might understand that the word sit is associated with the action of sitting down. And so that's kind of what the LLM is doing as well, but it's creating millions or even billions of associations between words and concepts expressed in words. And so that means that it's got this statistical model that says, for every word in a sentence in a particular context, what is the most likely next word in the sequence? And so if you played around with ChatGPT, as it's giving you responses, you can sort of see this thinking happen in real time as you get one word at a time generated sequentially as it's answering. So for this answer, say you're asking it, who was the first president of the United States? So it starts building a sentence. It says, the first president of the United States was George. The model thinks a little bit. It evaluates what is statistically most likely in this context to follow George, and it gives you Washington. And again, what makes this really powerful is that it's incredibly fast, as you've probably experienced, and it does this on that gigantic training data set of basically the internet. So I've used the dog example, but you can also think of it a little bit like a parrot. Again, it's something that takes in a human input, words, and then in this case, it spits out a human input. But is it actually understanding what it's saying? Does it have the same comprehension of like the context and the words that a human talking would? And in the case of the LLMs, it really doesn't. It's got this black box that it's created for itself that's essentially a statistical model of language. It knows in a sentence what should come next or how you construct different types of content. But the meaning is what's actually missing. And so this is one of the key things to be really aware of when you're working with generative AI and with LLMs, is that a lot of times it's going to give you, good quality content that has the correct meaning. But a lot of times this statistical relationship is going to throw it off. So I've put an example. This is from ChatGPT, the free interface that OpenAI provides. And I asked it a pretty simple factual question, looking for some book recommendations. So I said, what are some books about Abraham Lincoln? And you can read through the response it gave me. It's pretty good. Like, this seems reasonable. I've got 2 books. You can Google these books and see that they are, in fact, actual books about Abraham Lincoln. But the interesting thing is, if you dig a little bit deeper, so I'm looking at this second answer, Lincoln by David Herbert Donald. And I've highlighted the discrepancy that popped out, again, just because of statistics, I think. And ChatGPT completed the sentence. It said, okay, this Pulitzer Prize-winning biography. It's actually not the book that won the Pulitzer. It's the author for a different book. So again, this is like super minor and it's very nuanced. But if you were to imagine, how did ChatGPT complete this phrase with biography instead of author? It's probably deep in its web of connections between words. It's got something that says the most likely follow-on from Pulitzer Prize winning is biography, not author. And so that's how we got this output. Again, you'll start to see this as you play around with ChatGPT, and it really hammers home, why some of these errors or mistakes happen. From our perspective, it's a factual error. From the perspective of the LLM, it's just the most likely next thing in the sentence. And so I love this quote. It's been misattributed to a lot of different people. The one that I'm going to claim is Mark Twain, because I think he has some of the best misattributed quotes. And it's lies, damn lies, and statistics. So, in this case, statistics has the potential to lead these models astray. And what the creators of the model, OpenAI, have discovered is that even the best generative AI model, and right now the best one on the market, so to speak, is GPT-4. They're only about 80% factually accurate for some categories. And so the screenshot, and I know it's a little bit small, but again, this is in one of the handouts that is linked on the side of the presentation. But OpenAI runs an internal validation process on all of their models to actually assess how factually accurate they are for different categories. And so you can see they've benchmarked all the way back to version 2 of ChatGPT, and then GPT-4 is the green. And so for each of these categories, it's saying, how much does the response from the model agree with what a human would say is factually correct? And so it's good at science, it's good at history. That's where we're around 80%. But you can see that even GPT-4, it's got like roughly a 10 to 15% swing in how accurate it is, depending on the category of questions or of prompts that you're giving it. So super useful, depending on what you're writing about, to understand sort of the level of accuracy you're likely to get from this model, again, just based on the training data. And if you're using one of the older versions, I think the one I've been playing with is ChatGPT 3. That's the one that's available on the playground. That's even worse. That's hovering around 55, 60% accurate. And so what does this all mean for you? I think you can probably guess a little bit of what this means, but the question that I hear, repeatedly from conductors, customers, from, a lot of my colleagues, discussions that we have in Slack is, how does this impact SEO? Like, are we going to get penalized if we use AI generated content? And the good news, and if you take away one thing from this, you can, I guess, go away without fear. Google doesn't oppose AI generated content. Their Search Master guidelines are pretty clear on this front. They say, as long as your content demonstrates EEAT and meets the needs of the searcher, so basically your content is high quality, factual, shows experience, is relevant to the user, you're not going to get penalized. Using AI to assist with content generation, as long as that content is high quality, is relevant, Google says go for it. And I really liked this quote from their search guidance because I think it does reflect really well the world that we're beginning to enter with AI and SEO. And also frame out well the relationship between us as writers and the AI. And it has the ability to power new levels of expression and to serve as a critical tool. And I think that last piece, a critical tool, is really what's important here. AI in the hands of someone working to create great content, to get viewers, to share information, is just another accelerator, another way to help us do more and help us work better. But again, I'm gonna come back to accuracy and originality as our biggest risks. You might have seen this article again back in January. It came out around the same time that the AI hype cycle started, which is about CNET. So they had published, I think the stats were over 70 articles that were 100% written by an AI model. And more than half of those had significant factual errors, enough so that they pulled all of those articles down and they said they're not going to be using AI for now to write more content. So that's obviously the worst possible scenario where, your content is wrong and then the entire world finds out your content is wrong and you have to pull it all down and you're in the news. I don't think that'll necessarily happen to anyone on this call, but, the potential for AI to, just like in that minor example with the Abraham Lincoln book, to complete the sentence in the wrong way is fairly significant. The other risk that's worth calling out is originality. So generative AI, it's ingested all of the data that we've written, that we've created. But that's all it has to work with. It can't fundamentally create things that are new out of thin air. It's like that parrot. It's working off of the set of inputs of sentences, of paragraphs that it has in its training data and that it's built connections between to say, okay, when I get a prompt that asks me to write a tweet in the tone of a 12th grader, it kind of knows what that roughly sounds like. So again, if we go back to EEAT, aspects of what you're writing, if you're 100% using AI, you might want to think about how you inject something unique or some experience into that content, because that's not what the AI will be able to do for you. So my favorite part of the presentation is now that we understand what's going on under the covers. Again, super simplified. You're welcome to read the academic papers if you want more details. And we know Google's perspective of this. How do you actually apply using generative AI for your own writing? And so the starting point for anybody considering working with generative AI and large language models is prompt engineering. I think you've probably heard a lot about this. There's entire presentations online now that are solely devoted to the art and science of prompt engineering. But fundamentally, this is all about how do you design the best input to get the result that you want. So instead of asking GPT for something really generic, how do you give it the inputs that align best with its training data, with what it has been reinforced by the people giving it feedback to actually get your desired output? And so the best prompts, the best ways to get good content out of GPT really takes advantage of knowing how they've trained that model. Again, this is why I sort of love that first section of actually digging into what's going on under the covers. There's a set of prompt categories that OpenAI trained its model with, and I've got them in this screenshot here. So they've roughly classed them as generation, brainstorming, chat, rewrite, summarization, classification, extract. Like these are their broad categories of themes. And so they've also taken those themes and in a help article, they've given you specific tips. They're like, okay, based on what we have tested, what we've reinforced in this model, be specific, provide examples. You can point the model in different directions by kind of starting a sentence and then letting it finish it, and then also giving clear instructions. And this is all about how you actually go and get that good content out of the model. And so my best advice for this, if you are playing around with prompt engineering, is spend some time experimenting. Something I've also, I think, realized from working with some of my colleagues who are really strong SEOs is that SEO skill set of interpreting search intent and determining which keywords you should or shouldn't be targeting, like that applies really well to prompt engineering. It's a super similar, super transferable skill set. So being precise about your intent when you're composing these prompts and these queries is going to help you get better material out. The other thing that I've found to be really successful is specifying the answer format. So actually telling the model what you want to get out of it, what you expect to see. And so that can give you kind of general reusable prompts. Again, all of this is relevant if you're using one of the chat interface tools or you have access to the APIs. But there are a lot of companies now, a lot of products that have plugins that they've already done a lot of the engineering in the back end for you, and they've built out these frameworks to kind of give you suggestions. Conductor, we have a whole engineering team that's been working on this for the last few months and actually trying to figure out in the context of SEO and content recommendations, like how do they build the framework so that through our product, the user doesn't have to spend time doing the engineering, they just get the output. So it's kind of a fun space. There's lots of cool plugins that you can play with, lots of things to try. But getting to content, the first way that I find to be super useful for working with generative AI is around brainstorming. So all of these next 4 tips that I've got, they all have screenshots of some work that I did with ChatGPT, actually for ideas for a blog about the topic of this presentation. So I decided to get a little bit meta with all of this. The blog that I'm using is also linked. I didn't write it, a colleague did, but it has some good information. So for brainstorming, again, taking those guidance for how to get good answers in mind. I'm asking it specifically for 5 ideas for topics, and then I give it the category of things that I want those topics on. And you can see it gives me like some pretty good subheaders here if I want to use those to structure my long read. And then also some tips for what I might want to talk about. Now, the reason I find this super useful is it's a great way to get a high-level summary of common themes around a topic. So if you're thinking in the context of keywords, what are some of the long tail keywords that might be relevant to talk about? What are questions that people are asking? What are other aspects of this topic that are worth covering? Again, based on everything on the internet. So this is it's like a little bit like searching Google. But because we're just getting a topic outline, you're leaving room for your own voice, for your own expertise, your tone, your style. Like you're the one actually doing the writing. So you're not necessarily bumping into that originality problem. And then, of course, this is just an outline. So you don't need to do as close of a read on factual errors or what people are broadly calling now AI hallucinations, where it just makes something up entirely. Now, I've also found a lot of value in requesting sections of drafts. So I have tried to use OpenAI's ChatGPT to write full articles and full blogs. I suspect everybody here has played around with that. And what I found is that the more you do this, the more you request, complete content from it, you'll see that it follows a formulaic structure. And it often, at least in my experience, takes longer to revise what I've been given by the AI than to just write the first draft myself. But I found it's actually really useful for small sections, for getting targeted pieces of content and folding those into my own structure and my own writing. And this is a great way to get highly targeted content. So if, again, you're trying to rank for a keyword in an article, you're not quite sure, or you want some assistance with how you can be more targeted and more focused, this can give you snippets, paragraphs, sentences to fold into the rest of your work. I also actually find it useful for revisions. So if you remember from a few slides back, one of the areas of training that OpenAI did with this was around suggestions and revisions. And it's really good at this. You give it the framework. So in this case, I've taken a selection from Conductor's blog article, and I've asked for a revision around answering a specific question. So this is a SERP element. This is one of the people also ask questions. How does Google view AI-generated content? And I've pasted my content. And you can see that actually the revised content from the model is much more targeted. It's much clearer. It actually answers the question in a way that seems like it would resonate with the intent of that people also ask section. But what it's also done is it's retained elements of the content that I gave it. So if you're concerned about originality, about tone, this is a way to get revisions that adhere to what you've put in and the way that you write or the way that your company's house style. But still take advantage of that really good targeting and revision aspect of the tool. And then taking that one step further, you can get feedback from ChatGPT. So thinking of it a little bit like your writing buddy or your editor on your shoulder. Again, you have to give it clear constraints so that you get direction, so that you're sort of telling it what you're looking for. One of our engineers was playing around and she actually gave it very specific rating scales for different categories. So like how on a scale of 1 to 10, rate the clarity of this, rate the, relevance, like all of these different categories. My example was more general than that. I'm asking it to give me feedback about how well my content answers a question, and then also give me suggestions for how to be more relevant. And it's done a good job here. Again, this can be super valuable when you're going after a specific keyword, something long tail, part of a SERP. People also ask, I love this for, because you can get that type of really clear targeted recommendations. So really my biggest takeaway from all of this, from the AI revolution or evolution or whatever you want to call it, and the way that it's really opened up opportunities to do more with content, is that this is a tool. Used well, AI can make you more efficient, more effective, help you produce better content faster. But it's not a magic wand. It's not perfect. It's not bringing anything new to the table. But if you view it as that partner, in my cheesy picture, kind of as the connection, you're going to get some really useful value out of this technology. And so with that, I hope this has been useful for you guys. I would like to open up for Q&A now, and Lauren is going to help facilitate.
Thank you, Connor. Extremely useful, and thank you for running through all of the examples and how AI can be used. We have a lot of questions that have come in.
Oh boy,
quite a bit, yeah. So let's get things started on the Q&A side. Mm-hmm. First question, had a lot of questions come in about content,
yeah.
Obviously. And one question is, how can AI help score content and compare it to other content on the web? Are there tools that are incorporating ChatGPT or other generative AI that can do so?
Yeah, definitely. So this particular use case is a good example of something that you can't get from the free interface for ChatGPT. That said, there's lots of tools that are taking the APIs and then building frameworks around them to do this type of work. I am going to plug Conductor here because we're one of them. There's an alpha feature that we're testing with some of our customers called Writing Assistant. And that's its exact purpose, is you can give it a draft and it's going to compare that draft to top ranking pages and score it for you and tell you how you can make it better. I think, Bright Edge has something similar, SEMrush. There's even, specific tools just for content generation. So everybody's trying this. It's kind of a really neat area of opportunity.
And one interesting question that came in too is, how do you feel, or how are, I guess, AI content detectors actually detecting that the content is AI?
Ooh, I like that question. I haven't done enough research on it to be able to give a lot of specifics. From what I've read, and take this with a grain of salt, because as I said, I'm not an expert on this. There are, just in the same way that the model that produces the content is using statistics to make connections, these detectors can also kind of backtrace or interpret what most likely came from another model. I think to a certain extent, they're also looking at originality. Whether they work or not, I don't know for certain. Definitely try them and see what happens. I think there was a blog article I read where somebody had experimented and with various AI content validators. And some of them were good, and some of them said that the writing from a human was written by an AI. So play around. Yeah, try it out. I don't know.
Another question that came in is, where do you draw the line on using AI in content? Like, is there a specific limit or line in the sand, so to speak?
Yeah. So I generally think that I can write better than the AI can at this point. So I guess I have a little bit of an ego about that. So I personally wouldn't use something entirely AI generated, um, it, just because I think I can do better. But from a more practical point of view, the bigger issue, in my opinion, beyond ego, is originality and factuality. I think if you are letting the AI write all of your content, um, you are introducing risk of not necessarily having the most accurate, the best content, and then also writing content that might be kind of boring or formulaic, which is not something that typically does well in search results. So for me, I think my line is, I personally wouldn't recommend using AI to generate an entire blog entry or an entire page, but piecing together bits, like I shared in the tips, is a really powerful way to take advantage of the technology and then still retain some of the human touch.
And a lot of what we discussed today was content driven, and I got a lot
Mhm.
of questions that were content driven. But one question really stood out is, are there uses of AI from a technical SEO perspective that can be integrated?
Yeah, totally. Something that we've seen is around meta description generation, generating headers, anything that goes into the structure or the code is a great way to leverage AI, and is actually one of the places that we recommend to our customers as like a good starting point. If you don't quite feel comfortable using generative AI for, actual human facing content, using it on those elements in the structure of your page can be a good way to sort of dip your toe into the waters.
Got you. And another question that came up was, are there worries or issues with duplicate content? So, for example, if 100 different sites or 100 different people are using the same source, the same trained source
Yeah.
of like the default Chat GPT 4, for example,
Yeah.
and generating an article about the same subject matter from that,
Mhm.
is there a chance? Is there, wouldn't that be duplicate? Are there duplications that are happening? Or is ChatGPT or the LLMs all coming out as um, unique content, or is there overlap at the end of the day?
Yeah, love that question. There's totally potential for overlap. And I think, even if you go into like Chat GPT and you request articles from around the same topic in different chat windows, you'll notice really quickly that they all begin to sound similar. And you can refine the tone, you can give it guidance on, the number of words that you want, different topics you want included. But there is definitely an aspect of emulation or of copying that comes out of these models. And so that again goes to why I would urge you not to use them to produce the complete article. As a starting point, it's great. As a guide for revisions, it's great. As a way to get, specific sections, go for it. But if you're getting an entire article, you're going to want to revise it and fact check it, to avoid putting out, um, an article that reads the same or sounds really similar to the content that your competitor has written. Because again, going back to how these work, they don't generate anything original. It's all remixing what already exists on the internet.
And speaking of generating something original,
Mhm.
are there ways to train up a generative an AI model like ChatGPT to make that content different. Maybe something that's not in its default knowledge base, or ways to train the knowledge base to be able to pull more original content and or more original and updated citations, factoids, etc.
Yes, so some versions of the API can now be connected to the live internet. So the original version did have kind of a knowledge date of 2021. But I believe, I don't know the number of the model, but one of the newer editions of ChatGPT or the GPT API can hook into live data. That said, it's still remixing. It's not going to come up with like a novel theory or something that doesn't exist anywhere on the internet. But yes, it can tie into now the real world sources. I also listened to something interesting yesterday from the VP of Search at Google, who was talking about their approach to search generative experience and how they've shifted to have more of a focus on highlighting sources and really kind of showing their work in terms of where things came from. So I thought that was an interesting approach to having one of these models hooked into the internet, is summarizing but then proving.
Speaking of Google and AI, where do you see their generative search experience going? I've been testing it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
The first two things that I've noticed is that, yeah, it pushes down the organic listings, but then it also does give 3 citations.
Yeah.
A lot of which I've noticed are from very bad sites, or obviously paid content and things like that. But where do you see this going, and how do you see it affecting SEO as a whole?
Yeah. So I actually think there's an interesting opportunity with search generative experience for SEO. The places that it's really shined for me are where it's condensing information, or where you're sort of drilling into a Google rabbit hole that goes beyond the scope of your original general query. So like if you're asking it for like where to go for drinks in New York after work, and you can get it to become really specific with your requirements and what you're looking for. So if you're thinking of things that are long tail, or content that maybe is well optimized for a long tail keyword, but might not show up on that first page of the SERP for the more general keyword, like that's a really fascinating opportunity to me. If you can manage to have content that is so targeted for a niche area that it gets incorporated into the search generative experience output and cited as a source, that feels like a place where, this is actually going to, although it's pushing down some of the organic searches in those cases, it is surfacing content that otherwise might not have been seen. Obviously, it's still in like an experimental beta mode. So, we'll all get more data from Google as this becomes more real. But I don't think it's going to hurt SEO. I actually think it's going to introduce a more interesting opportunity for us and ways to have even more targeted content that drives better leads and better traffic to our pages.
Yeah, I think educating and pre-qualifying the consumer before they click is a definite plus.
Yeah.
It can be, because you also have to educate your clients that it
Yeah.
could lead to less clicks, but higher conversion rate and maybe a similar value from that traffic at the end of the day. Also, I think it's easy for us in the world of SEO to forget that we're beta testing it at the moment.
Yeah.
And we do a query every day and we see all of this stuff coming up. We're like, whoa, and Google has said that they are going to start in Q4 with their shopping base, their travel, flights, things like that, that are obviously easily monetizable. And at the same time, already do have those paid and sponsored that real estate at the top of the SERPs regardless. So I mean, it's here to stay more than likely, but at the same time, I think we have to remember it is in beta testing and we're part of the small sample that's actually seeing it. So the more we can test it and then remember that the rest of the world isn't seeing it, probably the better.
Yeah.
Next question I have is how do human writers protect their own content creations when those writings are distributed to attract clients and raise brand awareness, but at the same time that content is then being absorbed and educating the AI at the end of the day? Is there a way to block content from being accessed by and educating AI at all, or is there a reason to do so?
Yeah. I think it was the Writers Guild of America came out recently with a stance about generative AI and the way that it can, hurt somebody's personal copyright by remixing their work and spitting it out. So I think there is definitely that risk. And it's one of the areas where, if you start digging into AI ethics and responsible uses of AI, like this is a huge gray area. And I don't think it's an area that we've solved yet because AI is still so new. This feels a little bit like, and I'll probably be dating myself a little bit, but when Napster came out and you were suddenly able to download free music, and then over the course of the next decade, between intellectual property and iTunes and all sorts of different ways, we reached this kind of middle state where things were available but also protected. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's the way that AI also evolves into the future, but we're still so early. I think there's a risk. I don't think it's necessarily one that we should be really focused on right now, because the impact of this tech and the way it's being incorporated, as Lauren said, everything is still kind of in a beta mode. So just pay attention to it, watch it, see how things develop. Like the Writers Guild of America, there's a lot of organizations that are going to be applying pressure to big tech to adapt and to, use training data more responsibly. Right now, I don't think there's any way to block it, but maybe in the future.
And then on the flip side, are you aware of any liabilities that there may be when hosting that content? Like, so one of the first complaints I saw people talking about when ChatGPT came out is it's not sourcing.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't need a source because it's a chat bot. Like if you're having a conversation with someone, they don't need to source everything, or else it's just going to be a really boring conversation. They're just telling you. Mm-hmm. Then if you select to take that exported content and then host it on your site, obviously you should be sourcing where it came from. So once we saw Bing and Neva and other companies incorporating it in the search, sourcing was one of the first things that they started because it's a front-ward facing as opposed to a private chat environment. So I guess my question is, are there any liabilities that you're aware of, not just with written content, but also with AI image generation? Mm-hmm. Because we see the opportunity with replacing the old stock image marketplace with AI generated images. What are any liabilities you see there?
Yeah. So I've got my lawyer friend in my head who's like, preface everything you say about liabilities with "I'm not a lawyer." So I'll put that out there. But we're in that really interesting space right now where none of this is solved. We've even had debate internally at Conductor about how much to reveal about the use of AI. So in the writing assistant feature that I referenced, um, you know, do you show that this is powered by AI? Do you reveal exactly which models are going into it? How much of that should be shared? How much of it shouldn't be shared? And I think there's value on both sides right now. I know that comes off as really ambivalent, but I think use your judgment. Things like images, the same way you'd cite like a stock image. If something's generated by Dolly or Midjourney or one of the other tools, referencing that I think is a good way to go. There's, I think there's also rules around whether the outputs from the image generators can be used for commercial use or not. You can also read the what are they called? The user guidelines for your chat tool of choice or your API of choice. And that can give you some guidance around where they think the guardrails should be and how to cite or reference or how not to cite or reference. I have actually seen on some blogs, people are saying like at the bottom, along with the author section, written with assistance by ChatGPT. And that's kind of an interesting approach to take in terms of citing the secondary author, if you will. But I don't know if it's required at this point. But again, just as I was talking about evolving norms for intellectual property, I think we're also at a state where the norms for citing AI are going to solidify over the next months or years.
Yeah, it's really interesting that that CNET was the one that kind of got caught not citing, especially since the parent company does own Healthline and Medical News Daily, which have become kind of the paramount examples of how to properly cite
Yeah.
your money or your life oriented content.
Yeah.
So the transparency component is interesting to show where research was done, right? Almost like from a bibliography perspective, X percent was done with this, then reviewed by so and so, then final medical fact checking by so and so, et cetera, from a transparency model perspective. That is a really interesting concept. Not sure how it'll be picked up or not. So one question, a lot of questions came in about prompts. Where are some great guides to learn how to formulate the correct prompts to be able to get the results that someone is looking for when putting together, whether it's content ideation, an outline, whatever it may be, snippets, etc.
So the first place to start is actually OpenAI's knowledge base. I think, do I have access? I do. I just pasted into chat. Maybe it went through. There, I just pasted into chat a link from the OpenAI knowledge base. And so this is their recommended best practices for prompt engineering. So honestly, I'd start at the source, the people who wrote the best model on the market and the way that they provide some tips and some frameworks. Use them as a starting point, and then experiment. All of our use cases, our industries are different. And so if you're in a really niche space, perhaps the way that you get the best output looks different than what I would do for generating material about SEO and marketing. But yeah, that knowledge base article is where I'd start.
Great, great. And one question that came up is, which is kind of interesting, are there ways to exclude specific sources and or content within content or knowledge that was, I guess, published within a specific time frame when putting together those prompts?
Not that I know of. It is a little bit of a black box with the GPT models, where we don't have insight into like all the connections that it's made to be able to say like any connections that are related to this source, exclude them. I think there's a lot more control if you start working with the API itself. Again, like the engineers at Conductor are doing to embed some of that functionality into our product. But with the interface, I personally don't know of a way. Not to say there isn't one, but I don't know that there is.
Another follow-up question is, if 80% of 80% of the content that's given via AI is accurate, and then 20% is inaccurate, what are some ways to identify the inaccuracies in content and make sure that not only what you're publishing is accurate, but also what you're getting in the future from your AI tool is accurate as well?
Yeah, fact checking. I mean, I know a lot of publishers have robust fact checking departments, people like the New York Times or the, Washington Post. And I think as AI, in my opinion, becomes more and more widespread, the importance of fact checking, even within a marketing team, is going to become a more useful or more critical skill to have. In terms of ways to go about fact checking, I mean, you can use raw Google. You can talk to experts on your team. Have somebody who knows the content review it for accuracy before you post. Like, these are all strategies to make sure that what you're producing is factually correct.
One caveat I just thought of with utilizing OpenAI as a source is that I'm not sure if Google is going to want to serve content that's that we're telling them is help that their main competition is putting together. That may be one reason not to source.
Maybe I don't know how like cutthroat Google is about stuff like that.
Yeah,
We'd have to get someone from Google on the phone.
Yes, we would. Any final takeaways? We have a couple minutes left. Any final takeaways from your end on someone that's new to this, someone that's been experimenting, maybe putting together some blog posts and saying, "Oh, wow, I can do this all day." What are some first steps and some next steps to go out on that AI journey?
Yeah, I think keep having fun with it. Take that experimental mindset when you're using AI, and just always be thinking about how this can help you. I really think the tips that I shared earlier, like, I stand by those. I think they're really solid ways to get the most out of these tools. But I'm sure there's more out there that I haven't explored and things I haven't tried that could, help you squeeze even more value from LLMs and generative AI. So, it's a little bit like, I wasn't personally involved in the early days of SEO, but from what I've heard from, others at my company, it's a little bit like early days of SEO again with generative AI, where you do get to sort of experiment and play around and be kind of in the Wild West a bit. So have fun with it more than anything else, and just be aware of the risks when you're doing it, and where it's really strong and where it isn't as great.
Well, thank you, Connor, so much for joining the SEJ webinar today. Really appreciate your time, and Always great to partner up with the team at Conductor to be able to put these together. Just to let everyone know, the recording of today's show plus the slides will be made available, and then we're going to be sending over some of the unanswered questions. Maybe if you could follow up as part of the recap, and everything will be made available to, including the handouts, to all registrants and attendees of today's SEJ webinar. So thanks again, Connor. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Our next SEJ webinar will be held on June 21st. It's Google Ads, how to boost revenue and optimize for offline sales through CallRail. So this is more of an advertising one next time, not necessarily SEO and AI, but I know everyone's trying to mix AI into everything, so there might be a little bit on that. So again, Connor Carreras, thank you very much for joining today's show and for sharing this information. It's been a pleasure, and have a good day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.